So anyway, welcome to this session about the future of social impact reporting and its implication in the inclusive finance industry. I came to Luxembourg to open the European office for SPTF in 2019. And if I look around, there are a lot of young faces here, but I guess a few of you have been around in 2019. I wonder how many of us remember what our investor world looked like only 5 years ago. Inclusive finance already had a few decades of age. To achieve social impacts alongside financial returns had been the core promise of our industry from inception. And so, as a sector, we had, over all those years, developed standards and a common methodology to evaluate, to report transparently on our social performances and impacts. And whether it was by belief or under the pressure of clients, of staff, of public opinion, and sometimes maybe just to be trendy, even the broader business world had started to wake up to the importance of integrating social and environmental impact consideration into the businesses. Banks and companies had started to understand it, to measure it, to report on it, and sometimes even intentionally to target it. But who had really imagined in 2019 that 5 years later, our entire economic, industrial, and financial worlds would be held accountable by rules and regulations to integrate and to report on their impacts in their everyday businesses? The big change came exactly in that year, in 2019, when the European Commission launched its first regulation on sustainability-related disclosures in the financial services sector. This is a crucial and exciting moment for our entire industrial and economic system. And I want to express a big thank you to e-MFP to integrate this session into a full and intense agenda of the 2024 European Microfinance Week. Today, we try to take a forward-looking stance. And for this, I have the privilege, and we have the privilege, to hear the views on the future of social impact reporting and its implications for our industry from a great and diverse panel of frontline, committed, and deeply convinced people. Let me start with Linda van Goor, who is online. Linda van Goor is an independent advisor on EU finance regulation. Oh, now we have here Linda. Hi. We don't hear you yet, but can you hear you? Just make
Good afternoon, Jurgen. I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, super.
Thanks for having me.
And then here on my left, Ahmed Ouamara, Head of Sustainability Operations at the Luxembourg labeling agency LuxFLAG. Tatiana Kalinina, Senior Analyst, Sustainability and Impact at Triodos Investment Management, the global impact asset manager, and a subsidiary of the #1 sustainable bank in the Netherlands. And on the very left, Christophe Bochatay, the head of ESG, Impact and Knowledge at Triple Jump, the leading Dutch impact-focused investment manager in financial inclusion, but also in housing, nature, and access to energy. For the discussion, I'll move over there. And I would like to start this discussion today with the investor side. So Christophe and Tatiana, you have both worked for many years for leading impact fund managers that started to invest in microfinance and inclusive finance almost 2 decades ago. As I said, the sector was clearly the first industry since over 40 years to promise financial and social results. And therefore, over all those decades, we had developed tools and methodologies to evaluate social performance and impacts of financial services on customers and clients on a voluntaristic basis. A first quick question to you. How did a fund manager like Triple Jump or Triodos react to the sudden arrival of legislation?
you mind if I go first?
Who wants to start?
Check. Yeah, right. Thank you. Good question. So small correction. It wasn't necessarily sudden, the introduction. The introduction was indeed expected, but the amount of data and the way how it was supposed to be reported, that was unexpected. So we were not indeed prepared to have such a big volume of data, which is also very difficult to obtain. So that was unexpected.
Yeah, no, so from our side, of course, I think we welcome the regulation, right? Recognizing that, you know, there's really a need to sort of define what we're talking about, taxonomy, and really the potential that it has to promote impact investments and really safeguard from greenwashing. So definitely, happy that this was, coming out. But, to be honest, when we sort of first got it, I mean, it took us a lot of time to really actually understand, what is required from us and really sort of, understand how we apply it specifically to our sector, right? Which, is as with the regulation was not specifically designed with that sector in mind. And so, it took a lot of time and resource, but luckily, through the Social Performance Task Force and the Social Investor Working Group, we managed to, discuss this among ourselves, and that really helped sort of, interpret together a little bit the regulation.
Yeah.
So now, when you look back, what is important for social impact reporting from the point of view of an impact investor? Question again to you. And have you seen any changes over the past years in your activities?
Right. So maybe building on that question about whether it was sudden or not, for social impact, it is extremely important, the continuity. A lot of data points is not something that you from one year to another you can change. There is a lot of interpretation in this data, a lot of observation of the trends to make sense out of it. It's not necessarily exact science. So that part, that the data that we were already collecting and that methodologies that were already in place before the regulation came in, that was something very valuable, and overhaul of this had to, if it had to take place, then it needed to be really done cautiously with rigor. And this is probably speaking about, so the change that we've seen is that collection of impact data, I think, started really driven by values and the willingness to do good and yes, not do harm. With the regulation, I think the accent of do no harm, that is where the accent went. And the collection of data, interpretation of this data became more driven from the point of view of risk and compliance rather than the values and ideals that we were trying to capture in that. So I think this was the big change where we had to also adjust, okay, so how do we look at these data points? Are we collecting the right data points then to also answer to those questions? I think to us that was the biggest change among all other different changes.
Yeah, no. So what is important to when measuring social impact, I think I very much agree with you. Sort of there needs to be a certain degree of flexibility there, and sort of if we focus only on a few key quantitative indicators, we're really sort of missing the understanding of the impact. So being able to add qualitative indicators to the analysis, going beyond outcome, beyond outreach to outcome, and using different methodologies from deep dives or outcome surveys. It's really sort of how we can understand better the impact we generate. in terms of the things that are really sort of missing, or one of the elements that are missing now, in my opinion, is the concept of additionality. I think within that sector, there's a very broad range of strategies and investors, from the ones that are doing very pioneering investment that that are really market creation efforts to try to demonstrate, to very much more scale and commercial focused strategies. And if really the goal is for the public and for investors to be able to compare impact results, one really needs to sort of add the dimension of additionality to that. And then the other element that, it's quite surprising, but I don't think we have consensus on how we measure contribution. So, how many of the jobs that the company we finance created are attributed to our financing. There's still not a lot of consensus on how to do that, and a lot of double counting. Some of the progress I think that were made. I mean, it's while it's difficult to standardize on indicators, we did a lot of progress in standardizing on impact management process, right? Through the operating principle for impact management. Now there's the reporting norms from Impact Frontiers. And these are sort of very, I think, important elements in sort of the standardization and harmonization of approach.
And that's also, as you mentioned before, that's also the approach that as a sector organization, as a sector network, SPTF had been taken for the last two decades.
Yeah.
So then it's focused on processes, because that's a first level where we can agree on what is best practice.
Mm-hmm.
So last follow-up, and you already answered it partially. Does, in your view today, reporting as it is required by regulation provide a full picture of social impact?
Yes. Well, I mean, we don't have the social taxonomy yet, so right, and indeed, I think it is needed for us to really sort of define what different activities are. But no, I mean, for example, Triple Jump. I think one of the most impactful fund that we have is also the one that we don't classify as Article 9 but Article 8 because of the data issue, and so there's a clear problem there.
Yeah, it clearly shows the challenge with regulation as it stands today.
Yeah,
Tatiana?
Yeah, I'll support Christophe here that indeed, so the regulatory requirements is not showing the full picture. We're still missing a lot of, and the specific tailor-made indicators, for example, to show transition, for example, in certain case, or pioneering or catalytic impact that an investment can have. So that picture is not fully seen. But I wanted to add the change, and the one that we also, on one hand, welcome. On the other hand, it creates additional challenges. Is that there is certain standardization, and then inevitably you move towards, does it one size fit all? How can you squeeze everything that is very different and requires respect to context of that investment? Does it fit in there or not? And that the regulation was not created for us, so we kind of need to adapt it to our realities. So working in emerging markets where certain data is just not available, or certain frameworks are not available, regulation is not supporting it, and so on. So that adds complexity to, okay, how do I now show indeed that I'm doing impact, or that I'm sustainable and I can be Article 9 certified? Yeah.
Thank you. Good, thank you for that investor point of view. To Ahmed, as I said in the beginning, the past 5 years have shown a profound change to our sector with the arrival of regulatory obligations on social impact reporting. What labeling used to do in the past is now done by regulation. And I come with a bit of a provocative question to you, and we agreed on that before, don't worry. I don't put him on the spot. Do we then still need a label?
It's a great question. I can take this punch, in particular with the, I would say, the amazing introduction that both Tatiana and Christophe provided, right? We've been talking about cases where there are products that do have an impact, that want to have an impact, clearly, that have data challenges, that have operational challenges, application of frameworks, yet find the regulation where it does not exactly fit Article 8 or Article 9. Maybe it's a bit too simplistic as a framework. And even in the first place, probably this regulation is not even intended to be used as a product classification system. So my answer would be, hell yes. Do we need label? Clearly yes, because this is where indeed we do have, in my view, a robust complement with the regulation. The regulation and SFDR in particular, but there are other attempts here and there. We can mention typically also the UK SDR, which is a bit more advanced in terms of product classification system, but where indeed here there is an attempt to have a product classification system, yet it does not cover the specific aspects in particular that the funds try to achieve in the impact world. So that's, I would say, the preamble of our line of thinking here. So those regulations, again, they would be used as a foundation, and what LuxFLAG does and what other labeling agencies do when they deal in particular with impact fund is to complement that by having and requiring asset management to have actionable plans and go beyond disclosures only. So what we offer indeed is a third-party assessment, allowing to distinguish regulatory self-declaration with the intent and the nature and the objective of the product, if you wish. So in terms of labels, we can think of a diversity of label, and this is also what sets LuxFLAG apart from the different labeling agencies. It's because it has a diverse range of labels that go from climate, environment, and soon enough, social impact. We also obviously have the microfinance label. That's for the impact family of labels. What those labels require in the impact world really is to have a minimum allocation to assets that are aligned. So that's something we see more and more in the product classification attempts from the regulator. So again, these labels are dated 2016 and 17 for climate and environment respectively. So it means that there's been 7 years of running those labels, I would say probably ahead of what the regulation is requiring now, potentially to a wider population. This obviously I can grant. So with these labels, what we're trying to do is also to encourage and to shed some light on those products that do have these characteristics and those impact objectives. So it means that they have the possibility to demonstrate to us whether they're using international frameworks in their operating approach or in their business model, or to have internal research and resources looking at the selection of investee companies and to actually measure and report and demonstrate to the public and to us as well, obviously, what type of impact that they are creating. It can also be a combination of both. That's typically something we would definitely agree on. So the regulation, again, it's there, it's imperfect, and it's tilted heavily towards climate and environment right now with the EU taxonomy. There's been also, with the introduction of the ESMA guidelines on fund names, a number of actual requirements, typically looking at the allocation, but also the exclusion that funds need to implement in their product. So we're left with a big question mark above the social aspects. right? So this is where everybody is, you know, expecting soon enough social taxonomy, and that's what we've tried to do with the social impact label. So again, why do we need a label? It's sometimes to cover for these aspects until it becomes a bit more mainstream, until it becomes a bit more, maybe mainstream is the wrong word, but until it becomes a bit more developed. Because right now there's a lot of capital, and in particular private capital, that needs to be directed towards these funds. And that's also the role of LuxFLAG, is to support sustainable finance, and in particular support the development of impact when it comes to social impact as well. So having a label and disclosing and displaying this label for this type of funds, it's also an opportunity to get recognition for these products on the market, and hopefully to attract a bit more private capital into these funds. The approach that we take also when we discuss the content of these labels is also to have initiative de place, right? Where it means that the safe and sound approval and investment decision making within the fund manager. And the last P, and this is where actually we may or may not discuss in the context of the label, because the last P is normally the P for portfolio, right? We're looking at the portfolio and ensure it aligns with the criteria where we have a minimum allocation towards special themes, and where we also take a sample, and where we would usually request the fund manager to provide us with evidence of the research on these companies. So I would pick a name in this portfolio and ask for the fund manager to show me the research that they have and what type of objectives they would like to reach with this investee company. And this is where, from a portfolio perspective, this is where we can actually focus on the process and allow, to some extent, to have funds that are not launched yet, and for which we are going to grant what we call the applicant fund status, so the AFS, for a maximal period of 2 years, where indeed we are going to leave a time window for the fund manager to build up his portfolio, and then to show us again at the end of those 2 years, so it's 1 year plus 1, actually, optional plus 1. And at the end of this period, ultimately, we're going to look at the portfolio. And is it still in line with the initial objective? The way we can make sure that the portfolio is going to stay consistent with the investment policy is because of the legal documentation of the fund. Clearly, they're going to have from their prospectus and legal documentation binding elements that need to be followed and acted upon by the fund manager, which is going to leave very little room for deviation towards the sectors that the fund is going to be looking at. And this is where we have sufficient comfort to grant this AFS. And also, and ultimately, the governance of LuxFLAG is such that these funds are reviewed on a regular basis. So you may have the label for a period of time, but then ultimately, it's not granted forever. So this is also something we take into consideration when granting the AFS, the fact that the following year, if the allocation does not meet the criteria, well, if it doesn't, it puts in question the label for the applicant. So this is how it works.
Okay, basically saying that, so if you are an IFS in the process of building up, it's basically a 1 year validity extended one time. And then it can be confirmed if the portfolio corresponds to what the other Ps have promised in the beginning.
Absolutely.
Once you have that label, how long is the label valid in general?
So the validity period of the label is usually 1 year. What LuxFLAG is doing now is to extend the validity period to 3 years. And within those 3 years, there are going to be intermediary reviews on a yearly basis still. They're going to be looking at the investment policy of the fund, whether it has changed or not, and clearly to stick with the portfolio review. That's, again, at the core of the review that we perform, which is, again, about verifying and screening the portfolios. And again, sampling it, and requiring evidence to the fund managers. So these are the minimum 2 steps that we're going to continue to apply anyhow within the intermediary reviews. It might be more than that on a case-by-case basis if we see that there are other elements, if there is a change in the investment policy, let's say, well, this is something we want to look further. So it's something still that LuxFLAG reserves the rights to do, but if everything remains equal, then bare minimum that we're going to perform is a review of the investment policy, screening of the portfolio, and sampling of the portfolio.
Okay. And has that happened in practice? Have you withdrawn a label before that process?
In the context of the IFS?
Yeah, or even a final label already approved. When you say you do, it's a 3-year validity, but you do intermediary check. If you see after a year and a half that the portfolio development is not in line anymore, you have withdrawn a label?
Yes, it happened.
Okay.
Yeah. But if we screen the portfolio and if we see, for example, that there are investments that are not in line with the criteria of LuxFLAG, well, it's a point that we're going to discuss with the fund manager, and ultimately it raises the question as, how badly do you want to keep the label? And if you're ready to live by the criteria of the label and what it means to the public, and then I would say it's a simple decision to be made.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, obviously, it's that the label should also be a means of pressure to perform, because as an investor, why do I have confidence in the label? Because the label confirms to me that certain criteria are met, and it's not just a 3-year extension, but it is also something that's tested regularly. Thanks, Ahmed.
Thank you.
But back to you too. Have you labeled any of your funds at Triodos or at Triple Jump? And if yes, why? Or if not, why not?
Yes, at Triodos we have a number of different funds. So 1 or 2 of them are dedicated specifically to microfinance, and at least one of them is definitely labeled. But actually, and the reason would be indeed to show it's a badge of honor to show to our investors. And this is where I would like to actually comment, maybe ask a couple of questions. So where we see definitely added value of a label is when it helps us to indeed show that we go above and beyond in certain aspects. So to show that is recognized and assessed by an independent third-party provider. I think at the moment it is not always clear, because with the regulation, and I think Christophe will agree with me, impact investors and sustainable investors are actually disproportionately burdened, let's say, by the necessity of reporting. And you just described to us that there is extra scrutiny. Then, of course, what the fund manager would expect that those are the scrutiny that you would subject us to would be at least aligned with, I don't know, the OPIM, so operational principles of impact management or something else, so that there is also quite a bit of alignments. Because this is like the trickle-down effect. So everything that is imposed on us goes down to the FSP on the ground. And they're already raising questions like, okay, this is not serving me. Why do I have to provide to you all of this information? What are you doing with that, right? And so partially driven by regulation or the label. So on one hand, the reason to go for a label is recognition of this going above and beyond. And the second part, again, going back to this OPIM, for example, principles, it helps us to make sure that we are adhering indeed to the best practices. Because when we are checked against them, so maybe we have to correct or adjust somewhere, maybe we are even introduced to them if we didn't have it in the beginning. So that is helping us, our governance, our management. So we also see that external parties doing it for us.
Okay. At Triple Jump, you have a variety of funds.
Yeah, so we manage 8 funds, but we have not used the label. I think that has to do with the sort of type of investor that we target. I mean, very little retail sort of private investors, mostly, you know, DFIs and larger institutional, and they're closed-end funds. So, and, you know, there's really 1 or 2 times when the investor comes in and then stays till the end, and so they do a very deep due diligence when they're there. But I certainly see sort of the value of it if we had the different type of investor. Instead, what sort of was useful for us is to indeed do the verification on the operating principle for impact management. So it is much more sort of an entity level, sort of looking at our overall process at Triple Jump, how we manage impact.
And
yeah.
What type of investor or asset owner would you see as being more sensitive to a label? Is it more retail or is it institutionals? For what kind of investors in the funds a label has the highest value or comfort? Or
I could start. So one of our funds, is only institutional investors, and another fund is actually only retail investors. So there we don't really have a choice, right? So earlier today, Sebastian Duquette provided very interesting insights, saying that actually price-wise, we're better off attracting more retail investors because they are more interested in impact indeed and look a little bit less at the financial return. But what I think personally is that institutional investors have a little bit more capacity to do due diligence, to assess the rigor and the processes and etc. than a retail investor. So for a retail investor, it's just handy that somebody who he or she can trust said, yeah, this fund is really sustainable. There is this stamp. So if you invest in this fund as a retail investor with your 50 euros or whatever, you can be sure that you're supporting sustainability. So that is just my thinking.
Yes.
Okay. At this time, at that point, normally we had some questions to Linda. Linda van Goor has been working, and she's working. Oh, she's on now. We had some technical issues. So, Linda, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Oh, super. Great that you're back and connected. Linda, you have been engaged for many years at the European regulatory level to follow track on developments of the EU finance regulation. In particular, last year, you provided our sector with very highly valuable support to formulate a targeted global sector response to the public consultation that was launched by the European Commission in September 2023 on the implementation of SFDR. With its complexity in terms of content of regulation, but also in terms of regulatory process, this entire topic, of course, could fill out more than one session. But a question I would like to put to you: could you share with us briefly where the European legislative process currently stands and the main current discussions and workflows within the different regulatory entities relating to SFDR on one hand, but also to taxonomy regulations?
Yes, of course, I can. And thank you, Jurgen. Thank you for having me here. I enjoyed working with you guys enormously. You are a spectrum of colors as to so many stories from around the globe of what your money is doing. That's one thing. And the other thing is there's very big funds with very big tickets. And then there's the smaller ones with, for the 50 euro per month saver. It's all across the spectrum, so many different funds there are in this social impact niche of the market. So I enjoy that very much, and I hope we can continue that. This diversity is what the European Union should be proud of. United in diversity is a motto in the European Union, but we don't see that diversity in the debate around regulation. Despite all the good intentions of the European Commission, it's still the loudest voices of the deepest pockets that influence regulation, and the outcome of the negotiation between the member states and between the political colors in the European Parliament. SFDR, the first, regulation that we saw in the sustainable finance era, if it did one thing, we were happy with it because it was the first thing that explicitly made clear that there is sustainable finance and there's non-sustainable finance. So that distinction had to be put on the table, and it is. But now what we've seen is that if SFDR did one thing, it made sustainable investments more expensive. and more difficult. And that doesn't do justice to, what this market stands for. So we'll have to change bits, and we can, because both SFDR and the taxonomy are on the table. First, on SFDR, a revision is coming on. The officials in the European Commission are, as we speak, collecting homework evidence about what should be changed, and that turns into a thing that is called the impact assessment. The impact assessment of problems that still exist and that are not tackled by SFDR, or problems that SFDR is even causing and that need to be solved. So that assessment of what problems are there out there and what are the alternative solutions to those problems, that homework is done as we speak. We hear that there's a so-called scrutiny board planned in the spring. That's an internal examination board for the officials that are drafting this, where officials need to show to other DGs why the solutions that they think they should propose are the best ones. So we will see a revision proposal shortly after that. That's before the summer. That's what we expect. And then negotiations between and within Parliament and Council will start. And then we'll have an SFDR2 by like 2027 or something. The other bit, the taxonomy, indeed, you've been saying it's very environmental biased right now. We have to do stuff. The taxonomy in itself is also like a huge monster even. It's very, very difficult. And there's two aspects that are relevant for this audience. One is the usability of the taxonomy. Of course, it's a platinum standard, and we need to keep it as a platinum standard, but we also need it to be used as such and as that horizon where everybody needs to go to. The usability of the taxonomy is also relevant for applications to the Global South. And we have been asking for, an investigation into the usability of the taxonomy in the Global South. Thus far, without success. The platform on sustainable finance is hijacked, it seems, by incumbent market actors. And I'm still trying. The report is not out. I'm still trying, but I think you can see later this month when an advice comes out from the platform about the usability of the taxonomy, you won't see anything about the Global South there. If it is there, then good for me, but I don't think they'll, anyway, I'm pessimistic. I'm optimistic about social impact reporting, actually, because on social impact reporting, we are proceeding much better. The Social Performance Task Force and e-MFP and others in this network, in this audience, have gathered with others in the social impact bubble. And together we have published a baseline paper, why we think that the social taxonomy should be back on the table, why we should talk about that. And we were successful. So, like Tatiana said in the very beginning, the SFDR was not sudden, but the amount of data was, and especially on social impact, there's so many data, and we really need streamlining here. And the best practices in the market are not done justice today. So successfully, we got it back on the table, and we started a dialogue with the European Commission like last week. This week, we're talking to them, and the European Commission is very open to our suggestions. So we expect developments on the social taxonomy or social impact reporting in the coming year. And we hope to be contributing to that. Yes.
Thanks very much. And I can let's say, reflect some of these things that you said, because I remember when SFDR came into our industry, I think we can say that it came as a certain surprise, because we believed, and for very good reasons, that we were kind of ahead of the game, because this was, as I said in the beginning, it was so much part of our fundamental setup. Then this regulation came, and I remember discussions in our investor working group, which is about, 50, 60 fund managers and asset managers and funds in our industry. And we had very diverging first reactions. Some of our members said, oh, this doesn't apply and we'll just go and say not applicable. Others said, okay, it does apply and we can manage it ourselves. And I remember those discussions, and then little by little, we all came together and said, oh, but it is a step in the right direction, because so far, everything we had done in terms of social impact evaluation reporting was voluntary. So some were playing the game, others were not. Transparency is not an easy step, because transparency means comparability. And that sounds fantastic in theory, but comparability also means that I may look less fantastic than I looked when I was not comparable to anybody else. So in even those kind of discussions in the investor working group, to say, yes, we have a global position to say regulation is good because it brings us all to a certain level. Yes, we want to embrace it and not just argue to say, let's work around it and say not applicable, but let's see how we can use it. And Tatiana, Christophe here, I mean, and many others in the room and in this microfinance week have been extremely involved in many subgroups, defining topics to say, how can we make this thing work in our industry? And that has happened. And on the other hand, I think we were always aware that the fact that as a sector, we have been thinking about what is social, what means social in the financial services for so many years. We said from a very long time, I said that if there is a discussion at the European level to define a taxonomy, a social taxonomy, that experience of our sector should be brought to the table. So anyway, it was, we have these different topics, and e-MFP worked in this working group. So it's great to see that we are starting to be at the table, and that we can share some of the knowledge and some of the experience in our sector. A question back to you, Christophe and Tatiana.
Can I come back?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah,
please.
because SFDR was great, as in that it says that they're sustainable and not sustainable. Fine. And yes, social taxonomy back on the table, also great. But there's another thing that is really not helping us, and that is that sustainable finance is more expensive and more difficult than mainstream finance. And that level playing field, that competition with incumbents, is something that we really want to solve. So if there's one thing that SFDR2 must do, is creating a level playing field and also imposing costs and also imposing disclosure to those funds that don't care, or those funds that don't know their impact. You know, the costs should not be, as Hadewig Kuiper, the CEO of Triodos Investment Management, she always says, it's like I'm selling an apple or a donut. And for the apple, I have to show all the health benefits. And for the donut, I can show nothing. And so it's more difficult to sell an apple than a donut. And we really have to take care of that. So, I mean, I go into that fight really, determined to solve that level playing field.
Yeah. And thank you very much. A good example. And as a matter of fact, in the preparation of a response, of a sector response to the consultation, with your support also, we worked with the entire investor industry to define a certain number of priorities, because of course, the area is huge. And we said, okay, what are the main points that we have to focus on? And this equal level playing field was a very important argument. And you mentioned it. I mean, these discussions that we have between Article 8 and Article 9, if it comes with so much burden because we are doing more, and I think the example of the apple and the donut is something that's easy to remember. And so it seems so obvious. And that's exactly where we are now. Yeah. So Christophe and Tatiana, as I said earlier, you have very actively, with many others, contributed to the different sub-working groups of SFDR, which is coordinating all the investors in our working group to share the learnings and to make the implementation of SFDR something valuable for the industry. From what you just heard from Linda and all your involvement, what are for you the positive developments, and where do you see room for improvement in the, let's say, near future?
Start or shall I? Let me. So the improvement indeed in the fact that there is more data now available. It is a little bit more standardized. Certain data points, not everything, but still there is certain push for standardization. Actually, earlier today there was a panel on impact reporting, and I was wondering, like, what does it take us, different investors, to align the data points that we're asking from FSPs, because that was the ask. And apparently when the regulator comes with a stick, we manage to do that. We get together in 2 years of hard work, and we have
It worked.
PI indicators which are all standardized.
And I must say, as a bracket, that we never had so much commitment and let's say participation in the last years in our investor working group than when regulation came. Everybody was there because we all realized that we all there in front of regulation, we're all treated the same way, and that at some point everybody realized we need to get that together. Sorry, I'm interrupting you, but
yes, you're impartial leader of this conversation, obviously. At the same time, so and I lost the train of my thought for a second. Yeah, so there is also proliferation of data, but at the same time we have more proxy providers. Hopefully artificial intelligence will help us here running all these models, and et cetera. So this train is set in motion. So that is a positive one, and indeed, hopefully, it will deliver more comparability and reduce that greenwashing risk that was initially, the whole idea behind it. On the other hand, what we see is it is a lot of data, which makes it a bit more difficult, and you want to focus on what is material, and this is where we're speaking, like, it is context dependent, especially for social impact. But what is material, right? So nowadays, everything is basically material. So that prioritization and that's tailor-made, let's say, solutions, they become maybe a little bit more difficult. Where I'll also see the lack is the feedback from FSPs. So, and that goes also for the labels. So you speak to investors to define what is needed and how does it work. But we need to be speaking to the people on the ground, those entrepreneurs, the MFIs and etc. So what makes sense for them? When they tell me that we have educational loans, and this is also a little bit of my personal plea, and I need to come up with indicator or definition, what is educational loan, how I'm going to measure it, and so on. It would have been great if they came also with that, you know, and said, okay, this is the educational loans, this is how we define them, this is how we measure them, this is how they grow, or this is how they don't grow. Great, but okay, so that I think is still missing at the table, the perspective of the MFIs on the ground.
So I remember a time where sort of in our sector, you know, we were saying, we're not going to apply a climate lens, or we're not going to look at the sort of the environmental impact, because sort of we're focusing on this sort of social, priority, and I think, you know, we realized, you know, over the years that sort of, you know, we need to take a bit more of a global view and look at sort of, all the impacts that we might generate. So regulation has helped us also in that direction, in sort of applying, standards from sort of the broader industry and getting out of sort of our focus on the sector. I think one positive thing is that, you know, the regulator didn't issue the social taxonomy right away, and is actually taking its time to issue it, because I think it's much more complex than environmental taxonomy. And it will have a huge impact on sort of, you know, where the sector is going and how we will define ourselves. I think the financial inclusion sector has like a few very specific particularities that make it particularly difficult. So one, it's, you know, the fact that it's in emerging markets and frontier markets. The other one is that we're investing through intermediaries, right? The third one is that we finance mostly the informal sector, right? So these are companies and entrepreneurs that don't have a lot in place in terms of safeguards, etc. And then the fourth one is that financial inclusion is not always considered, you know, a goal by itself, but sort of an enabler of other SDGs, right? And so I think getting the social taxonomy right for this makes it, you know, it's challenging. Besides the fact that we're actually a small sector in terms of size, and that so yeah, the work that Linda is doing and sort of really to make our voice here is very crucial.
And I had to smile when you said you remember a time, because I remember very well that investor meeting that we had. I don't remember what year that was, because for many of you who have been around for a while, what we had defined as standards, universal standards in inclusive finance, for years, it was 6 dimensions on social. And we had a green optional module for organizations who also wanted to evaluate the green aspect. And I remember one of our members, when we had the discussion, who said, I mean, how much additional damage can you possibly do to the environment with a microloan to a smallholder farm in Africa? So, you know, why do we even have to look at that? So great, we have certainly advanced from that to say that's also part of responsible financial services. Today, the universal standards is 7 dimension, 6 social and an environmental. And I think maybe in that case, the history basically comes well for us, because the European Union and the regulation and taxonomy started with environment, where our sector had less learnings. And we had time to wake up to a certain extent and say, okay, but there's also going to be social, because for the time being, the social part of SFDR, besides gender and human rights, is very high level and certainly insufficient. But we also had, it gave us the time also to wake up, to say, there is something still in the making to which we have something to contribute. And we are totally in the process of that. Linda, I'd love to have a follow-up question to you as well. I mean, you already mentioned it a little bit. There are, of course, a big, let's say, a big variety of actors who intervene in the current process of SFDR and taxonomy regulations. Can you say a little bit, I mean, who are those different big actors and contributors to the process? And what can or what should our sector specifically do in that context?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that. As I say, united in diversity is a motto, but then we will have to speak up. Everybody in Brussels has a voice, but you need to speak up in order to have that voice heard. And as I said, it's the incumbent, it's the traditionals that have a lot to lose, a lot of market share to lose, that have the loudest voices. So what are we doing now as to following up on that SFDR consultation of last year? It's about different things. It's about defining the contribution. There was Christophe was saying that in the beginning, like, what is contribution in Article 217? That's something that we also have to discuss. But as to social impact, we're talking, of course, about things like the social bond principles, about the European Pillar of Social Rights, about Article 25.1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. What is a socially sustainable investment? But then, you know, so it's one exercise to agree amongst yourselves what is happening. And as Tatiana said, the regulation was there, and all of a sudden we could agree. Good. So keep up that spirit so that you do agree amongst yourself. But then once you have that baseline position, we need to go to the European Commission. They are open to us in the drafting. So that's now. For the coming half year, we really need to talk to the technical officials who are doing the technical drafting. How can you actually make this applicable to anyone in the whole market. That is the conversation that we should have in the first half of 2025. After that, to talk to the parliament and to the member states in the capitals. In the parliament, that's in Brussels, all the political colors. And Jurgen, you know me, the audience doesn't know me yet. I work with all colors across the whole spectrum. So not only with the left, but also with the right. And we will have to share our story in very different ways. There's something that we as a community then need to do is translate our story into their backgrounds, their constituencies. Why is this important for them? And then come with that story in the European Parliament. And then third, it's the member states in the council that have to, get their own positions. Every country in Europe is different. They all have a voice at the council table. I mean, that's France and Germany usually take the lead, but all the capitals matter. So then you go to your own capital, to your own government, and talk about what it is that you could bring to this table. And this far on SFDR and the taxonomy, until last spring, when we went there was a screaming silence when it comes to the Global South. And still, when we're not awake, there's a silence about the Global South because there's so much to do on this continent already that people just do not have an eye for the Global South. So we have to speak up, come together, visit the officials, visit the members of parliament, visit the capitals, and they are open to anyone who asks for a conversation. But we have to speak up. We have to join up, get together and come to some insight that's useful for all, and then speak up. We can do that. So I hope to work with you guys in the coming year, and then the year after, and we want to bring it home.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. That's a great message. And honestly, I can only confirm from the experience over the last year and a half. I must say pleasantly surprised to see on those occasions, whether it was meeting at DG FISMA, meeting with parliamentarians, even discussions here in Luxembourg with CSSF, to see that there's a great level of curiosity at these levels, because people who work for those organizations, they do want to get things right. Yeah. They were really listening to the experience, and we went to DG FISMA as an industry network and with a couple of investors to present very practical observations. And you remember that very well. I mean, DG FISMA, they have a very structured agenda. We had a half hour exactly of meeting, and we spent an hour, and they canceled meetings afterwards, because I think they don't always get an industry feedback which is not just trying to defend its, I don't give an adjective to it, its business case. But suddenly there are people who are trying to get things right. And I think they've also felt that. So it is an opportunity. I think, like any industry, we need to make time and resources available to make sure that regulation that comes continues to enable our activities and doesn't hinder it and limit it. We need to make sure that social impact reporting does not end up to just be a tick box exercise or a marketing tool, but lead to real change. And I think the work that we have started in those direct meetings, in those consultations, in those different workflows, including the very practical translation of legislation into our everyday investment activities, which we did. And I can only invite you, for those who don't know, go to our Ceres SPTF webpage. We have a social investor working group page, which lists an entire set of guidelines that we developed as a sector with the support of the investor community, guidelines on certain specificities of implementation of SFDR, use them, and share that debate. We have a couple of minutes, and I'd love to give the floor to you here. Reactions, observations, questions to LuxFLAG or to the investors or to Linda. Please share any observations or surprises or frustrations or congratulations, whatever. Oh yeah, great. Somebody who's not shy. Do we have a mic? Or if not, Maybe can you bring one? Yeah. And if you can just briefly say, oh, you also, the mic is coming. Oh, if you speak loud.
Hello, early evening. This is Charlie Clark from representing CGAP
Okay.
at this conference. Although I'm an independent impact measurement and management specialist, I was really heartened and to hear about all of the progress behind the scenes, actually, for me, but not for you, on SFDR. And as we know, yeah, I like the way you framed it in terms of being capturing the low bar. So it's the screening of sustainable and non-sustainable. We delivered a session earlier today on outcomes-focused IMM. So really thinking about the authenticity of IMM, getting us to really about the changes in people's lives resulting from financial services. And I recognize from a regulatory point of view, that's even a step beyond where we are at the moment with the social taxonomy. So, but what I did want to ask the question of, maybe to Ahmed, is to what extent do you see it being possible to include social outcomes in a labeling system? So as we know, OPIM gets to outcomes only on a voluntary basis, which is disappointing because, as we know, impact investing should take us to the changes in people's lives. So I guess I just wanted, I'm curious, not entirely sure what the question is around regulation because it's so far in advance, but on maybe a labeling with the absence of anything relating to social outcomes at the moment, whether it's be consensus standards or regulation, how might we bring that in and when?
Thank you, Charlie. It's a great question. Can you hear me well?
Okay. Yeah, if you try to speak, it should be.
The way this social impact label is going to work is to look at particular investment themes. Right now, I think you hinted towards it, is the fact that the use of outcomes as a criteria is probably, on the one hand, relatively restrictive in the sense of what exactly we're looking for, because the more precise on the outcome we're going to be, the smaller the population of target funds can be. And that's something also where it's a balance to strike when designing the criteria. The themes, though, that we're looking at, what are they? They will be really much about decent work. What do we mean with decent work? There's going to be subcategories in education, in employment, access to employment, for example. We're going to be looking at adequate living conditions. So by adequate living conditions, we mean access to affordable housing, access to finance and financial services, access to healthcare, for example, clean water and sanitation, for example. So those are indeed subcategories that you're going to find in this second theme. And the third and last theme so far that we have is going to be about sustainable communities and society. And here we're going to look at cultural heritage protection, for example. We're going to look at diversity, gender equality, inclusion overall. So you see that right now we're sticking with those themes. Also, what is important to mention, and that's also in line with what all my fellow panelists have mentioned, there are things going on the market. There are things taking place, discussion taking place also behind the scenes. So as the market will evolve and as the regulation will evolve, the label will evolve. So those criteria, as much as I would like them to be set in stone. They're not meant to be set in stone. So considering the changes that will take place in the future, when the social taxonomy kicks in, obviously that's a new variable that we have to take into consideration in our equation. So all these elements in particular, from a regulatory perspective, will be refactored in when the time comes. So the timeline also is, I would say, blurry in this respect. Maybe we're talking very few years, maybe we're talking a bit more, maybe it's 2, maybe it's 5. I mean, God knows, but it's true that it's one of the elements that we reserve the right to, which is, again, still consulting with our stakeholders, with the market experts, with the funds that by then will be holding the label and taking into consideration the impact of these changes, if there is an impact that is required by the market evolution, namely the social taxonomy. That answers.
Thanks, Ahmed. One short last, Patricia. And then I would like you to think about one last sentence. Linda as well. We'll finish in a couple of minutes. You don't get the drinks that we will have in a few minutes. Really sorry, but
we have been supporting where we could in this process. One thing that happened in the first taxonomy was that not always the right also international entities were involved in the definition. So maybe, and this is now coming from international organizations with a social mandate, maybe it is those engagements and taking those louder international voices along with the social investment going into these institutions. And maybe that might help.
I didn't.
Of course.
For the SFDR last year, again for this new round,
Yeah.
so that you get other voices that can support the message that you want to deliver, and that can support because of knowing what's there.
Yeah. And for Linda, because I saw you were wondering, that's Patricia Lisa from ILO, we had worked together with for many years on dimension 5 of work environment, etc. So yeah, well taken care. Linda, one last recommendation or wish, future of social impact reporting. Where would you like us to be here in this room in a year?
Don't allow others to write the regulation that applies to you. Speak up because you are worth it.
Bravo, thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
That's an encouragement. If you add, please. No?
Yeah, no, I was struck me when Linda said, it's really in the next 6 months that we need to do this. So yeah, we don't have any time to waste.
We don't have much time. And the great success, Linda, you mentioned that it's fantastic. I remember I have been trying to get into the, to get our voice to the European levels. And it was very difficult. And we have tried to apply to the platform on sustainable finance. We have tried to join in the advisory committee to the platform. It took a long while. Now, suddenly, on the topic on social taxonomy, we're being approached. That's fantastic. I think, yeah, let's be proud. We are a sector with decades of experience on those topics, and with the right support also to help us get those messages through. And we're really thankful of the cooperation and the support we get on your side, because, yeah, that's a different world for us. But we're also aware that we have something to bring to the debate, not to defend our model, but to make sure that tomorrow we are in a world where this social impact reporting is something that's concrete, reliable, transparent, and really brings change that we need for microfinance, for the financial system, and for the economy in general.